Thanks for tuning in, guys. You're listening to Ace Comicals. I'm Greg Driver. I'm joined by Rahul Jani and Leon Everett. Let's go! Good morning, afternoon, evening, and welcome to Ace Comicals episode 87, the second in our three-part series on all things Watchmen. So we're discussing Watchmen-related media chronologically, and that means that today we are all about the 2009 movie and the 2012 comics of the Before Watchmen. Can you call it a series? It's more of like a collection, I don't know really, because there's like several series all lumped together. It's like the Before Watchmen run, I guess, because there's like a lot of material there. It's like 30 odd comics, all in all. But yeah, so that's what we're here to do today. And as last time, we are joined by special guest, streamer and lifetime member of the DITB Mafia, Anthony Askew.
Hello.
Yes. So, I guess we should just get straight into it. So this is a film that, like, ever since the original graphic novel hit, in some way, shape or form, they've been thinking about making or had been trying to make. I think they originally, got onto wanting to make it in 1986 was when they first started, trying, yeah. Lawrence Gordon and Joel Silver, they had the film rights for it. 20th Century Fox, and Alan Moore wouldn't write a screenplay. So they got Sam Hamm involved and he rewrote it, make the ending, making it more manageable. And it basically got put in turnaround in 1991. From there, it got moved to Warner Brothers, where it was picked up by Terry Gilliam. It was going to be directed by Charles McKone. Charles McKone was he was going to direct it and rewrite the script, looking at this. And it didn't get the budget it needed. And they said it was unfilmable and they dropped it entirely. And then in 2001, they picked it back up again. And it was like Lloyd Levin and Universal Pictures. And they hired David Hayter to write and direct it. So Hayter left because he didn't like it at Universal, creative differences. And then Gordon wanted to set up something at another studio, and it kept going and going around like this with different people attached. At one point you had Michael Bay, and then Darren Aronofsky to direct Hayter's script. And it just went round and round and round and round until finally it got to, Tim Burton at one point wanted to direct it. And it was just, it just kept going and going like this, where different people kept getting on board and rewriting the script and everything else until it came to Snyder.
Has there ever been a hotter potato in cinema? Like a project that just nobody wants to touch? Or
I think
scared.
I think you guys know more than me about movies, so I don't know. Leon, do you know of anything that's been a hotter potato than this?
I think similar to Watchmen.
Akira?
Akira's been kicking around for a long time. A lot of directors and producers have been attached. Superman, in between Superman 4 and Superman Returns, there'd been, again, like Tim Burton, Kevin Smith, a lot of people had been part of it and had written a draft at some point.
I mean, I was going through the wiki of this, earlier, and of this movie just to see the production stuff, because it's all detailed there. It's and the amount of names that have been attached to this is absolutely ridiculous.
How much money has been wasted, budget aside for this film, the amount of money that's been sunk into this, a dying project that was, I don't want to say it was never alive, because I'd be maybe a bit too harsh, but it's insane.
Yeah.
It was 4 different studios and directors and all so many different screenwriters and stuff. It's poster child for development hell movies.
Yeah, definitely. Absolute development hell. Development ninth circle of hell, I reckon. So yeah, I mean, that lands us sort of in the 2008, 2009 times, which is Probably around then, maybe 2007 is when I, like, as I probably detailed in the previous episode, it was like hype surrounding the idea of this film that got me on board to read the graphic novel, because I got recommended it by people that were hyped for this movie. And it was around then that I was introduced to the world of Watchmen and things like that. So I was like, and then when the trailers started dropping for this, I was like fully on the hype train for it. Now, before we get as far as discussing like trailers and pre-release hype and everything else that we may have had ourselves, like how, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being least, 10 being most, how much do you think this movie should have been made? Like, let's just get that out there first of all. Like, what it does, like, because obviously we're all going to have biases as to whether or not we prefer the original book and whether we think this movie is, like, was even worth it in the end or whatever else. Like, so just get that out there straight away. Like, try and keep it like a number between 1 and 10, and then we'll see if this changes.
It should have happened or shouldn't have happened.
If it should have happened. So right, okay. 10 saying it should have happened, 1 saying it absolutely should not have happened in any form, universe, reality, whatever. So
I'm going to go 10 because I had so much fun seeing this in the cinema. I went like twice within 3 days, I think. I really enjoyed it as a cinema experience. I was a lot younger then, and I've got to be honest, at the time, I really, really, really liked it. I even had a Watchman badge at this point. So I was like, I was flying the flag. I liked Zack Snyder leading up to it. I loved Dawn of the Dead. And like, I was at that age where 300 was, big muscular bearded men beating people up and, violence and stuff. So I was on his, I was fighting his fight.
I think I'd have to say the same thing. Maybe not a 10. I think like most things, I would give a 7. Like I'm a fan of seeing just how things unfold, whether or not it should or shouldn't be made. You know what I mean? Like I want to see it either succeed spectacularly or fail spectacularly. Either way, I'm kind of happy seeing the attempt. So like that's the reason I was excited for the Dark Tower film, even though I knew it was going to be crap. And that's another Development Hell film, by the way. But like, yeah, for that reason, I was excited, and I think this had a lot of promise. I think, like Askew was saying, seeing all the trailers and like just generally being a fan of the book and like being sort of a nerdy, wanky, literary type as well. That's the reason I liked the book so much. And then seeing that they were going to make a film out of it from the same guy who directed 300, which had a really cool visual style. I think, I was up for this being made.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, I was like, here's the book because they're making a film of it. So I was like reading the book. And then from there, I guess because people around me were on board with this, I was on board with it as well. And I had tons of fun with it in the cinema. I really enjoyed it. I liked 300. Back then, I wasn't really paying attention to who was making what as much as you guys were, because you guys are more filmy than I am. So like when I'm watching movies, until I started like discussing things with you guys like we're doing now, I never really had much of a knowledge or much of a kind of an awareness of this is that director's style and this is what this guy does and things like that. So I didn't really get it, but like and I already liked 300, but I didn't put the names together because I wasn't really looking at who was directing films.
Yeah,
I was looking at what films were based on. Yeah. Right.
I have thoughts on how appropriate his style is coming off of 300, but like the fact that it was a comic book movie that had been adapted is the thing. Like Leon, as resident film nerd, what were your thoughts?
Yeah,
first thing, like I feel like can like joke and stuff about, and I've probably said it on this podcast before. I've definitely said it in passing regarding certain projects when they get announced, or when I've seen a movie, and I'll say like, it shouldn't exist, But like generally, I'm one of those people where a bad or mediocre adaptation doesn't really affect the original for me, and my only regrets in those cases are if I think, oh, this is the only chance. So when there's things where it's been adapted and the adaptation was not good, or like sort of blew up and didn't have an impact, that hurts me to a degree, because I'm like, oh man, now the general populace are going to be missing out on this cool thing. So and a recent example of that, semi-recent, would be the Ghost in the Shell movie, which people who saw it, I know people who quite enjoyed it, but that's beside the point. It kind of like fizzled and didn't really leave an impact on anything, and that sucks to a degree, because I'm a big stan for all things Ghost in the Shell, and it would have been nice if a Western adaptation of it, or even just a live action adaptation of it, had done enough to get people interested in the IP and bring people to it. I mean, one of the good things when that's not the case is that it means that you don't have to go with endless franchises and sequels. But overall, I would have said in the run up to the movie, I would have been a 10, obviously. And then following the movie, I might have dropped down a bit, but not too far. But at this point, I would say I'm always interested to see an adaptation of something. And even if it bombs, there's always going to be something interesting in what happens with it.
Yeah.
And at the very least, it gives you an excuse to be mad at the studios, like with the Dark Tower and me.
I think in the run up to this, I had probably more of a hype for it. So I would say in the run up, I was probably nearer a 10, maybe 8 or 9. Having rewatched it recently, I'm probably now around a 6 or a 7. But I think that's because when I'm watching it back now, I'm not just looking at the movie. I'm looking at everything that happens around it, and the massive tsunami the original comic created versus the lack of ripple this movie made, and the potential that the source material has that this movie didn't manage to tap into or realize. Because I think that, in my opinion, the way they made this film sort of missed the point a little bit of the source material, and they made a superhero movie, but Watchmen isn't necessarily a superhero story, if that makes sense. And
I think that's the general consensus, right? That's the opinion that most comic book fans have of this film.
Yeah.
And it's weird because in some aspects, the attention to detail for some of the smaller things is too in depth, that then just leaves possibly the more important parts of the story just to kind of flutter past in a second. And then there's so much intricacy, yet it's quite heavy-handed at times. So there's no consistency. I think it's so up and down in that regard. And I think to expect to cover that 12-issue great comic in a film is ludicrous. It couldn't be done. I don't think.
I mean,
it's not a bold statement, but
well, your point about all the details is super on point, I think, because it's production value in lieu of knowing what to do with the narrative, and that happens in spades in this film, I think.
Yeah.
And there's certain things that I appreciate way more now watching it than I did then. Certain the lighting from Dr. Manhattan is almost always on point. If he's in a room, the room's lit blue and it's cast on someone's face, all that stuff. I think all of that is on point 99% of the time.
To branch off into nerdy sort of behind the scenes stuff, that was the actor literally wore an LED suit, right? Which was diffusing light literally into the scene. None of that was done, or most of that wasn't done post-production or anything. They didn't add lighting sources in after the fact or anything.
That's really smart. I think there's certain things like that, and some of the set design I think is good.
I mean,
the streets and stuff I think really captures what the mood I got when I read the comic firstly. So
yeah, I mean, from a film fan sort of point of view, I think this is one of those films where I loved looking at the behind the scenes just as much as the movie, or perhaps even more so in some cases, because seeing how much attention to detail they put into what they thought, what you can clearly tell they thought was one of the most important parts of getting this film adapted was getting all the little details right, which I don't think is necessarily the right way to do it, but they obviously put a lot of love into that. And just the level of intensity of replicating scenes from the comic and replicating all the settings and the Gunga Diner and all those kind of things is incredible. They tore that comic apart and put it onto screen.
Oh yeah, impressive. A lot of it is shot for shot, and that's down to the fact that they used the comic as the storyboard. So, like, yeah, I mean, the same way Snyder did 300. Really, he used the comic as a storyboard, and he had Dave Gibbons as an advisor as well. So, like, Alan Moore wanted nothing to do with it, and Dave Gibbons went on to become an advisor for this movie. I think Alan Moore even, like, at this point, he was like, any kind of, like, any money from this should just go to Dave Gibbons. Like, I think he was like, he didn't want any, he wanted so little to do with it. He didn't want to do interviews and things, and he was like saying, like, any profits from this, just give it to Dave Gibbons instead. Like, that's how bitter he was about the fact that this eventually got made, because it was the whole thing about him waiting for the rights to revert to him and Dave Gibbons because of the terrible contract that DC gave them in the first place. And this isn't just something that Alan Moore would have suffered with. This is something that I suppose still could be a thing in comics is the contracts that these creators work under, where they create these intellectual properties, they create these stories, these characters and things like that. But then because of the contracts they sign and the way that they work for the companies like DC and Marvel and such, these characters then become the property of the company and not them. So they lose the rights to their own creations, and then the company just can do whatever they want with it. Like, if they want to kill that character, they can kill that character. They can have another right to do it because it's their character, not yours. And I think the thing is, when you're at that, like, kind of, you've got that story, you're going to the big wigs, I feel people will accept a lot of iffy terms and because you don't know how big something's going to turn out or how beloved it's going to be. Well, they didn't expect it to do what it did. They expected it to go out of print and the rights to revert to them. But because obviously the thing whipped up such a storm when it was released, the book, the rights never did revert to Moore and Gibbons, and it just stayed perpetually in print for however long, until it's still in print now. You can still buy it. They're still making, money off it. And because it's just been repeatedly in print forever, they've never ever got the rights back. And this is something that they were sort of tricked on. Yeah, exactly. And part of this is down to the way DC every so often, what you'll see is they had the original graphic novel that stayed in print for ages, and then in 2009 they made this film which kind of like shoved it back under your nose. So then everyone's out buying the book again to see where this film came from. And that's going back to what your initial question to us was. Yeah. A reason why I've arrived at that point where it's like I don't mind any type of adaptation is that in the run up and in the discussion of a thing coming out, and even on the release of the thing, it exposes people to the original thing. And I think even Zack Snyder has said in interviews that he wanted the movie to be an advert for the book as well. Yeah, which I respect that massively because I want people to go and buy the comics. But like, it's I think it's what I'm getting at with that is not necessarily that it's selling comics, because that's what we want it to do. But what it is the fact that it's I guess it's not what Watchmen was designed to be. It's not how Watchmen was designed to exist. It was meant to be a one and done, one story, never expanded upon, never, it was meant to be like, because it was like the watershed moment for comics. It was the birth of the graphic novel and everything else, but it was meant to be a single contained one and done. And I think the fact that this continued popularity and everything else kind of misses the point and the philosophy of the original text, and the point that Alan Moore was trying to make with this story, and what Alan Moore and completely throws out what the original creators wanted this to be when they conceived it and wrote it and created it. See, I'm a lot less precious. I'm a lot less precious these days for certain things like that. Yeah. I'm way more kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Like accepting of this film
than I am those Before Watchmen comics. They feel like a bigger disservice to the source than what this does. Because this
definitely, yeah.
Whereas those comics, they were, I hate to say it, but they are fan fiction, obviously, because it's essentially, I'd imagine they're fans of the source.
Yeah.
But it's so fanficky that the dialogue, it just doesn't feel like any of the real characters are saying those lines.
Well, I mean, like,
a bigger disservice.
I would say, like, we should frame this in a context. So, like, we were talking earlier about what was our, like, 1 out of 10 in regarding of this thing existing. But once we knew it existed and we got trailers and stuff, what were people's feelings then in the run-up?
Like, because you feel like they shouldn't be making this film, but then at the time I was thinking, yeah, okay, I'm excited for this because the trailers sold it to me.
But I mean, the trailers in a way are the reason that you read the book.
Yeah.
So you're going to have a different experience than, say, others.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah, because my whole thing was I read the book because people were hyped for this movie. So that's what I mean. This is like me coming into it because this movie got made. But in retrospect, the way I'm looking at it is I'm looking at it from the point of I can see why Alan Moore's so annoyed about it.
Yeah, but Alan Moore was going to be annoyed by anything that was attached from it. So I'm not going to take his word for whether something's going to be good or not.
Stubborn fella.
Yeah.
Doesn't say he's wrong, but doesn't mean to say he's definitely right.
Also, I think that's more of a discussion for when we're actually talking about like the nitty-gritty details of the film and what's changed and what works. But for where we are in terms of leading into it, I think that this will be divorced from that, especially if you hadn't read it before going in. Because for me, I can't remember if the first teaser trailer had come out before or with The Dark Knight, but it was around the same time. And I remember, obviously, I knew the movie was coming, and I'd seen 300, and I knew that they had hired Snyder, and I'd liked the movies that he'd done up to that point, and I thought he's one of the few Hollywood directors who could still shoot action. So I was like, okay, even though like that's not what expecting, because I remember reading that one of the reasons that Terry Gilliam left the project is that he got to a point where he was like, this should be like a 6-episode HBO show, not a movie, because there's just too much here. You can't fit this into a 2-hour movie. And I would have loved to see that version at that point in time. I was part of that team, whatever team, I guess Team HBO. That's the team I was. I would have preferred that to a movie, and I was saying that. And then the teaser trailer came out, and for the me who was me back then, it was before we were at this point that we are now, where now it's not enough for me to put a cool thing that I've seen on screen and for me to get excited about it. But back then, where it's before all this MCU stuff, and we'd had Sin City in 2005, I believe. And that for me was like a perfect translation. It wasn't even adaptation. Rodriguez translated that from the book. And again, in the same way that Snyder did, he used the pages as storyboard and even brought on Miller as like a co-director. So when the trailer for this hit, that first teaser, the one that had the Smashing Pumpkins track, the beginning is the end is the beginning.
Oh my gosh.
That was hype, because one of the first things you see is all the yellow text, and then Archie smashes out of the Hudson and starts flying up, and it's exactly like the panel. And for me back then, and I think this was in the run-up to Dark Knight, I don't think Dark Knight had come out yet. But like, for me, I was like, my brain exploded, and I thought, okay, maybe this could work. Like, maybe this could work. And that first teaser trailer, I've watched that a million times. I've discussed it with Askew and everyone a million times. It was just so hype in the lead up to that. And obviously Dark Knight did come out, and that's still my favorite comic book movie.
That trailer has been the subject of many a lit discussion at
convention. And like, I've watched that like so many times, and there's elements in there. There's not too much action scenes in that first teaser trailer. It's a lot of Zack Snyder's slow-mo. So when I watched that trailer, I was like, oh, this is cool. And like, it feels, because it's a photocopy of the book, just live action in HD, it looked cool. And like, that's why the hype level was maximum. And I said, WB have just nailed The Dark Knight. I can't wait till next year. I'm hoping they nail Watchmen. And the second trailer hits, and the second trailer is the one that has all the action scenes in there. And that, for me, I had like a weird up and down experience, because the up part of that experience is that they use Muse Take a Bow, but they start the trailer with like the Philip Glass score of one of my favorite movies of all time, Queen Scotsy. And they play not just Pruitt I Go, which is my favorite track on there, but Prophecies as well. And they do a mix, which includes both of them. And then it goes into the Muse Take a Bow. And I thought, whoa, this is really cool music. But at the same time, then I'm getting loads of like slow-mo action martial arts and stuff. And I was like, I started to get worried.
For some reason, I have Muse Knights of Sidonia in my head.
That's way earlier than that. Well, actually, I don't want to say that in case it's
it's not that. That song's great, but it's not that song.
It's definitely Take a Bow, 100%.
Oh, for some reason, I was thinking, I'm sure I've seen something with Watchmen with Knights of Sidonia attached to it, and I don't know why.
AMV.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I don't want to see that.
Maybe it's an AMV, yeah.
With that first trailer, or the first teaser, or whatever it was, like the thing that you said, Leon, like where they get the carbon copy of the book translated to celluloid really, really well, and then your mind gets to fill in all the gaps of all the action happening in between these like slow-mo vignettes, and that's why like you have that dissonance when the second trailer comes out, where it's like all the stuff that you built up in your head, where it was like this really moody, atmospheric like translation to screen, and then it replaces it with just generic or semi-generic action sequence where it's that whole, it's like Silk Spectre dropping through the ceiling and like a hair whipping about and all that kind of stuff, which is not
superhero landings and all that.
Yeah, which doesn't, that's the stuff that doesn't ring right, because like it's moody in the wrong way, whereas before it was giving you that moody staring out of the screen sort of thing.
Because it's just slow motion of people looking like the characters in places that look like the comic. And
doing things that they wouldn't quite be doing, as far as you could tell from the book.
Yeah, and like, the thing with that first teaser, the only difference is the color palette, and you're fully prepared for a color palette, because it's 2008, and we all want gritty stuff from our comic book movies, because we've just had Fantastic Four and other trash, and we want gritty. So
if 300, which is basically red and sepia.
Yeah. Well, with Zack Snyder, there's a lot of browns and oranges. But like, you want your Watchmen book, but you don't want those weird purples, even though you love the purples in the book. In your movie version, you want everyone to be wearing leather and blah. So like, it was almost perfectly engineered for that moment in time.
Imagine this got made instead of Batman in 1989. Imagine we got a Watchmen film back then instead of that.
It would have looked cool.
Yeah.
In a different time. But I want to mention the action scenes. I mean, say there's 6 in the film. There's only one good one, which is Rorschach when he gets attacked by the police, when he goes back to Moloch's apartment and the police show up. I think that's a really, really good scene when he like breaks out the apartment. And there's some good slow-mo there.
Yeah.
I used to be a big slow-mo guy. At the the aerosol, all that stuff. I think that really does a good job of capturing that moment in the comic for me, whereas all the others, I can't think of much else, except maybe the Canadian riots and stuff
the prison riot.
So I hate just so are we leaving pre-release and jumping into the movie now?
I think that's what we're doing, yeah.
Okay.
Askew's just cannonballed off the top of the balcony into the pool.
No, let's go for it. I just wanted to know what I could talk about.
Yeah. No, we're done with pre-release. We knew that the trailer was hype.
Just thematically, but let's go.
We saw trailers. We were all hype as hell. We're
in our early 20s. What do you expect? I hadn't been burnt by that point. There was nothing like we were young and
I've been burnt by Transformers.
Ready for it.
I've been burnt by Michael Bay's Transformers by then. But yeah, that's another story for another time. But yeah, so I mean, I went to the cinema to see this, and I actually remember like doing this like with a couple of mates. We went to the cinema to watch it, and then we came out of the cinema, and then we sat in a bar with the graphic novel on the table to have a dissection of it, thinking we were some kind of like scholars or something. Like
that's pretty snooty from you, who only picked up the comic because they're making the movie.
I know. I know. I look back at myself with disgust. I'm like, God, even back then when you'd barely been through the gate, you were trying to be a gatekeeper. It's
like turning around in the middle of the gate and saying, no, sorry.
Yeah. Like there's a queue of people trying to get through the gate, and then I turn around and shut the gate on the rest of them.
I've just found this and now it's mine. Right?
Yeah. So I'm sitting there around a table with these people with the graphic novel in the middle of the table, and I'm sure we're doing a discussion of it. And then I went to see it another time with another group of people, and I'm sure I went to the cinema about 3 times.
I would love to be a fly on that wall, seeing young you and that squad just talking shit about that comic. I'd love to.
Nerds.
Yeah.
See, so my story for this was, it came out around, I think maybe a little bit before my birthday in 2009. And so I bought me and all of my friends tickets to see this film because I was super excited for it. And I know at least...
Super rich by the sounds of it. Jeez.
I mean, that's what we did for our birthdays, is we did stuff for each other.
That's nice.
Yeah, it was nice. It was cool back then. And so me and one of my friends, we were super into this. Like, he was the one who got me into the comic book to begin with, and we were both getting hype over the trailer and stuff. And I remember, like, me and him came out feeling quite excited about this, and the rest of my friends hated it. And I still haven't quite figured out why, because I feel like, looking back on it, it should have been the other way around. I feel like I should have came out of it feeling a bit more deflated, but like I was just riding high on how stylish it was, I think. And and that's like how I am with all of these things, right? I come out feeling really energized by what I've just seen, and then can pick it apart after the fact. The thing, like, you were talking about action scenes, Askew, and like the thing I wanted to point out about that is, right from the get-go, like right from the start of this film, it sort of betrays its hand really quickly, because it does. So like, you see the fight between the comedian and whoever he's fighting.
Sorry, how can I forget that? Go
What?
on, Ray. No,
Yes.
I said there's like one good one, and it was a Rorschach apartment, but there's 2. There's that one.
But yes,
between the comedian and Adrian Veidt, yeah.
And it's an amazing opening to that movie, and it's one of those things that I put on as, you know how they say when you buy a new stereo, what's the first album you play on it? And loads of people say Dark Side of the Moon and that kind of stuff. When I get a new TV or a new sound system, I play this scene because it's got like amazing audio. It's got really cool, like, it's a good way to test like how the black levels of your TV are working and stuff. And so I love this opening scene, but it goes on for just a minute too long. Like, you can tell right off the bat, Veidt comes in and he's like super strong, and comedian's holding his own against him, and then suddenly he's getting overpowered. And then there's a point where like comedian gets back up and punches through a wall, and that's the moment where it's like, oh shit, this is not showing the same realism as the book. And it's the same thing with the fight in Moloch's place that you mentioned with Rorschach, where it's this really inventive, really stylish, like slow-mo thing where he's panicking, grabs all the stuff out of the cupboard, sets up his escape from this room, and then he does all that stuff, sets people on fire, dives out the window. And that's when it should have ended, and that's kind of where the fight ended in the book, where he falls out of the window and gets captured by the cops. But then he goes on for another 30 seconds doing all this kung fu bullshit.
Yeah.
And like, this film does that over and over again, where it feels like it needs to add more, and that adding more, if anything, takes away from it.
I'm going to say something controversial. I don't think there's one single good action sequence in this movie. And you have to let me explain. So, like, there's a lot of cool-looking shots and cool choreography, but action usually is meant to serve, like, a narrative purpose in a film, and you can tell, like, the difference between, like, good narrative action and bad narrative action just by talking about 2 Matrix movies. So in the first Matrix movie, every action scene furthers the plot or furthers character development. In The Matrix Reloaded, the action scenes are, like, the technology is 10 times what they were doing in the first Matrix, but every action scene just slows down the movie. They pause the narrative or character development so that we can see some cool action for 5 minutes, and then the story continues again. And I would say that the curse of this movie is that all the action is framed well and shot well and technically looks great. And that's one thing that no matter what my current admiration for Zack Snyder is, whether it wavers or falters, and back then it was stronger than what it is now, I've always respected him as an action director in Hollywood, because he was giving us wide-angle framed action like in 300, while everyone else was giving us this horrible, choppy, quick-cut action that took over Hollywood. And all the action sequences are shot really well, and you can feel the hits and everything. They don't cut away at the wrong moments. But all of it is just ridiculous, and it breaks the movie. And this is where, that first sequence tells you about the whole rest of the movie. Because, that sequence has some really cool moments, and it's I remember loving that sequence. And it's still a cool sequence to watch, divorced of context. But like you said, the punch through the wall, the head through the marble, that's telling us at that point what this movie is. And every action scene after that, why do the crime busters have superpowers?
Exactly. No.
There's moments that betray each other within the same second. So that thing about him being punched through the marble, there's a really great moment where you see Veidt overpowering Comedian, and the look on his face really sells how oh shit moment he's in. Or the bit where he throws the butcher's knife and stuff like that. And that's the stuff where Zack Snyder is amazing. The framing of that shot, the way the camera whips to it and really sells
catching
the
machete.
Yeah, catching the machete and how that motion suddenly stops. All of that stuff is great up until it then undercuts itself immediately after by doing something which isn't true to the character. Like you said, it's not selling the narrative it sets up. It pays off in completely the opposite direction, and it does it over and over and over again.
You're overlooking. Maybe I'm trying to be nice to this scene more than I should. But when he punches through the wall, not the pillar as such, but when he punches through the wall, you cut to the inside of the bedroom, and there's a photograph of Sally Jupiter.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, that is just a little tidbit that I'm trying to kind of pull some. I totally agree what you're saying, Leon, to further the narrative, but I guess maybe I'm just trying to be nice to that one.
Well, that's something I think originally I used to semi-forgive that when that criticism came up, maybe in my own mind, to convince myself that it's a thinner wall, probably maybe it's not the same brick or whatever.
Yeah.
But then half a second later, he gets a matrix kicked across the room, and then the marble thing happens, and he's picked up with one arm and tossed, and it's I thought the whole point is that there's one superhero, and he's Dr. Manhattan. The Superman is real and he's American, but
the other guys are costumed adventurers. Yeah,
but they're everyone is kind of like the boys, and they've been juiced up on Compound V or something. Why have they all got powers and can jump really high and do all this crazy stuff? That makes for cool 2009 era action, but it just makes no sense in this film at all.
This is my point about them taking something that's not necessarily a superhero comic and turning it into a superhero movie.
I feel like that's of its time, though. I feel...
Yeah.
No, of course it is, but that's what we're discussing.
So I think it had to do that. It had to.
I don't think it had to.
I don't think it had to, because there's stuff that, because it becomes so sensational, in that same scene afterwards where you have Rorschach, firing his thing up through the window, and it breaks through the police barrier and stuff like that, and then he lands really deftly on the glass, where it's like with the fight scene later on, where there's a coordination to him that shouldn't exist in his character, right?
No.
The fact that he's scrappy and inventive, that should be the thing you sell, not the fact that he's cat-like and nimble, because he was never really that in the book, it's it doesn't understand what it wants its characters to be. It's conflicted with wanting to make them look cool and superhero-y, and that's fine to your point about Go ahead.
I was just going to say it as well, because all the stuff you're saying, it makes for great trailer footage.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's really cool when Rorschach flies up to the thing and lands on the glass. It looks awesome in the moment, but then it doesn't make sense with the rest of the stream of narrative that you're getting. And we're in the first 5 minutes still here.
I know, and I think when I sat to dissect this film, like with my friends after watching it, like when we sat in the table, we were, I think, so you got to remember that it was 2009, and we were probably like, because we were young and we were probably trying to seem a little bit more like smarter than we were when we were talking about it and whatever, and we weren't really getting as deep as we're getting now at all. But we were just talking like just like base stuff, like similarities, like costumes and things, and none of this stuff about them having superpowers in a story where these people don't necessarily have superpowers registered for me at that point, and we were all on board with it.
Once a week before, so
yeah, exactly, yeah. Well, more than a week before, Askew. I mean, give us some credit, but yeah.
At the same time, that's also fair enough, because I came out of the movie saying like, "Oh, they got the smiley face, perfect, and the blood dripping down the eye, and it was so
like,
cool."
Oh my god, even Mars had a smiley face, and they did the thing with the this and they did that, and Dr. Manhattan was naked and all this stuff, and like, but then like,
and that's the thing. Like, I have to like bring back up again how like I was there as well. Like, I don't want it to sound like I was holier than thou back then. Like, I was in the same boat. I left this movie and I was like, it wasn't perfect, but I liked what they did with it. And I saw it twice in the cinema, I believe. And back then I was more of an apologist for Snyder. And I would say that this is when he started to get some hate. And I'd be like, but he shot this, da-da-da-da. And I used to frame it as like, the film is a good companion to the book, but really you probably shouldn't watch it alone. Yeah. And then it's in later, it's in later years where it's more like the critiques have been like more gaping. But even back then, on my first viewing, while I was in the boat of like, this was cool. It was cool. I enjoyed this. It's what I wanted. Like, it could have done more, but I enjoyed this. I've always hated that stupid alley fight scene where they're just killing the knot tops. It makes no sense.
Please, you brought that up, because I used to defend that scene.
And I remember arguing with you about it.
Yeah. And I couldn't agree with you more now. It's ludicrous.
What was your defense at the time?
Well, I was young and I enjoyed the action. But in a nutshell, like, I was kind of just looking at it as from the enjoyment of a first viewing, whereas.
Plus, if I remember correctly, it's similar to what you said just now, in regards to, I think you were looking at the realities of it, because while I disagreed to a degree, I do actually agree with you on the sense that they had to do it, so they didn't have to do it, but if you want to get if you want to get $150 million to make an R-rated comic book movie, you need to have some action in there. And if it's R-rated, you need to earn that R rating. So I don't think they had to do it, but in terms of a business thing, I get what you mean. Like that, I get why decisions like that were made and why it's come out that way. And I believe that was the crux of your argument.
On that note, with the whole violence and stuff, they still managed to miss the most poignant, violent looking moment in the entire book, and it just gets stripped from the film, which is the bloody streets of the city.
Yeah, because they replace it with all this other.
That makes no sense. Like the one time where having that R rating
would have been perfect.
Yeah, and they go completely bloodless.
It severely undercuts all of the lead up to it.
And I'm fine with the Manhattan thing, which we'll get to, I'm sure. But there's no excuse for that not to have the bloody streets.
Exactly. Don't they take the birth of Rorschach though and gore that up slightly?
Yeah, they gore it up, but they do it in a way that, because this is a criticism that I held while watching the movie as well. Only a few. Again, listeners, I'm not holier than thou. But this is one thing where during the movie I hated it, where I always thought it was this brilliantly Rorschach-y and evil to force the guy to saw off his own arm to get out of the fire type thing. It's it feels so Rorschach, and in this where he just cleaves him in the head. It's why?
Yeah.
He's just hyper violent, but it doesn't have the same impact as the other action would have.
Yeah, you see, they made that hyper violent, and then they toned down the bloodshed at the end,
which was massive. As I mentioned last time, was my favorite moments of the book.
Yeah. And
12 pages of this like horrific eventuality, right?
Yeah.
And they really, because like that's one of my notes for the end of this film is like you have all of this build up. You have like even in because I watched the ultimate cut, which had all the director's cut footage plus the Black Freighter stuff, and the Black Freighter stuff is really like interesting here because it adds a couple of tertiary characters to the story who in the comic, like it's the news vendor and the kid who's reading the comic. And like you get to understand them, you get to understand like how they have friction with each other, how they come to like enjoy each other's company. And then at the end of the comic, like they're the two people that you see get eviscerated first, or like that, you know, like one of the main set pieces, one of the main character pieces where you get to see them eviscerated by the squid bomb.
Yeah, because all the side characters end up on that one side street just as it happens.
Exactly, yeah. And then in this one, because I don't know, it just really undercuts. It really undersells like the severity of what just happened.
Yeah.
Because it's so bloodless and because it's so clean and it's this blue ball of things which just splay the buildings out, and then you get to see none of it. You don't see the aftermath. You don't see the I don't know. You don't see the consequences.
Crater at best, which is when Manhattan and Laurie shows up, and it's pathetic.
And what's wild, it's one of those things where it's almost a suffering of like, you know, like Roland Emmerich world destruction porn, where like you're watching sequences where literally in a frame millions of people are dying in one go in those movies, and you're just like, whoa, that looks so cool, it looks so semi-realistic. There's no like fear. There's no like loss of breath, like, oh my god, that's like monumentally tragic or whatever, or just like you don't feel that at all. And it's same with this, where more people die than die in the comic because it happens. It's 15 million people because it happens all over the world. Yeah, and it has way less impact than the initial 3 million from the comic.
Yeah, because
one page in the comic is more impactful. Like I said, like it left me breathless.
Yeah.
Whereas this, it's just it bugs me.
And it immediately cuts back to the Antarctic, which is like that's part of the problem is it doesn't linger anywhere, and there's no remnants of the people. It's just they've disappeared and all the buildings have exploded. And I think I could be wrong on this, but I remember the conversation at the time was so many depictions of like world-shattering events changed because of 9/11. So like for example, with Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers, the way that like Sauron's tower collapses had to be done in a specific way, like it collapses from the bottom and then explodes outwards, so it didn't look like the Twin Towers collapsing. And obviously this is happening in New York, and it's happening on a massive scale. All of the buildings are being eviscerated, so it does that thing where they blow outwards from the impact crater and then back inwards and then crumble. And like I think there's some of these things which are part of it, but then it could have doubled down on the human factor instead of showing the buildings.
Is that not
whatever
more reason to go squid?
Yeah, I think
like,
the squid thing
one
is
more
also...
reason. Is that not one more reason to do the squid thing?
I think that regardless of those factors, squid is something that you can do once you've had a Guardians of the Galaxy and a Thor Ragnarok. But I just don't think that people already think it's silly enough that a blue man's walking around and an unexplained Bubastis. I think the squid might have been. I think not even from a public perspective, I can't see an exec signing off on the squid.
Yeah.
Well, we said this earlier, Leon. We like, well, I don't know what Greg and Rahul like, but I like the inclusion of Manhattan as being the threat that everyone can like visualize.
I like it, and I think that it makes sense in the context of doing the movie, especially where they've modernized and they're talking about energy, which is a very noughties and like 21st century thing to go on about.
It works for me, and like Leon said, it was topical, and I think they altered it to probably keep within budget constraints and whatever else, and B, to keep it topical.
But also, I think that it's an easier thing to like. I think if you do a TV series, like if they had done the Terry Gilliam, you could seed stuff where the squid comes and it doesn't feel as unexplained and ridiculous. Whereas I think having 2.5 hours for the theatrical cut, them seeding the stuff to do with Manhattan Energy and then it happening all over the world, it makes more sense in that reality that would stop World War III rather than just New York getting some friendly fire.
Well, the squid stuff. Sorry, I was going to say the squid stuff in the book is actually like if they were going to follow the book, they could seed it, because it is seeded in the book, because they have those little scenes of all those artists and stuff working on that island.
Yeah, that's
I think this film seeds too much stuff that's not necessary already.
Yeah,
I feel like any extra of that stuff would.
Yeah, that's my point. Like, I think if they had a TV show that connotates like you've got more running time and you can delve on side stuff a bit more, which would set up that and you could have more time to set up all the different people disappearing and then them on the island. But I think for a movie, like as you said, there's so many distracting things that are just there because they're cool in the comic book that I think that on top of that, I think it's nice. I think it's clean and efficient. The Manhattan project.
It's a safe bet that pays off.
This is an age-old. Oh, sorry. Go on, carry on, Ray.
I was going to say, at the time, in 2009, I agreed with all of these points a lot. I think it's really deft story writing. I think that's one of the things that David Hayter actually introduced to the script, was tying in Manhattan as the cause of this disaster and like using that as the catalyst for, you know, this global communion or whatever. And I really appreciated that. I thought that was really deft writing.
Was that David Hayter's work then?
I believe so, yeah.
He's still listed as main writer.
So yeah, because I think somebody else did something else with his script. They took his script and did something with it. Yeah, that's it, yeah.
And I think in my most recent viewing, like the other day, something that I didn't pick up on earlier was like what that sacrifice is, like you said, all of this seeding from... like how we get the scenes in the comic of all of the artists and all the scientists and stuff that come together to create this thing that is out of the world and can be sold to, you know, all the world governments to make them come together. And what it removes is then Adrian Veidt sort of like really holier than thou shitty Elon Musk style exploiting the intellect of others. And like that's something I really missed this time around. It was like there were all these amazing artists who put their heart and soul into this project. There were all these scientists, and you kind of get it in the film because you have like the scientist raising a glass to him at the end, and he's giving his little speech, and it turns around and all the scientists are dead because he's poisoned them or whatever. But like that's the only moment you get of seeing how it took a massive team of other people to make this happen, and then he entirely discards them because he's the only one who's allowed to know the secret at the end.
Yeah,
and I don't know. I feel like that was something that is sacrificed heavily by having this new plot structure of having Manhattan be the cause of it.
Yeah, because another thing that you lose with that is that in the book, the comedian finds out because of his like work. In the movie, you have an offhand line about him working for Nixon and he came across the plan, whereas like he actually saw the island in the book.
What about the opening credits? I know we've like barely scratched it, but
best bit of the movie. Best bit of the movie.
Fantastic. Yeah.
The montage is the best bit of the movie. It's like world building. It's fitting in a lot of stuff that you couldn't fit into the main story, and it's Snyder at his best, slow motiony.
I really like that so bit, good. Actually. Yeah.
So there's something I do hate in it though.
What?
The thing I hate in it, I think I brought this up on the Watchmen episode. The comic episode, is that in the book, when they talk about the comedian, there's a lot of stuff that we know the comedian probably did it, but it's all sort of in the background type thing. Like it's unconfirmed, and it's like it's building up the myth of the comedian being Nixon's number one hitman type thing.
They retcon that in the comic,
and like in the book, there's a line at a dinner party, and he says like. They're like laughing and joking, and it's all these like connected elites. And one of them asking something, and then his retort with a joke is just don't ask me where I was in relation to the grassy knoll type thing. And obviously he's hinting that did I help kill Nick? Did I help kill Kennedy? And in this, it's just explicit. Yes, he did. And
but then when you sorry, we're gonna come on to this, but when you read the Before Watchmen comics, he didn't kill Kennedy.
Yeah,
they changed it again. They flip-flopped on it.
And then like the comedian, they have this again later where in the book they say that. So we hear offhand that Watergate never happened because, but what happened is that these two Washington Post writers just turned up dead, Woodward and Bernstein. And then in the movie, he just says it offhand to Night Owl when they're like riot busting.
Yeah.
It's like, I haven't had this much fun since Woodward and Bernstein. It's like, what? Why would you say that to Night Owl? Night Owl is not like a
what are you?
He's not on your side.
Yeah,
he's just a superhero.
Yeah.
I have a funny anecdote about that because I remember before super hyped for the movie and was like, reading up on stuff before the film came out. And I was talking to Christian about how I read a thing saying, oh, they make this really like clever, subtle allusion to the Kennedy assassination. Keep an eye out for it in the intro. And we watched it and it's like, no, wait, what? That's not subtle at all. That's just on the screen. That like the person who wrote that article lied to me and ruined that sequence for me. I mean, not ruined it, but like why even pretend that it's subtle? Yeah, it's so weird.
It looks so cool though. That the whole thing is so cool.
And it's
that shot is mega gory.
Yeah.
Like there's too many issues with the comedian, or aspects of his story getting too much spoon fed with this. Like the whole him being Laurie's father in the film. Oh, by the way, he's your father. Whereas that is so kind of not drawn out in the comic, but it's built upon and like kind of set up nicely. It happens in an instant. You don't get any guesswork or anything. And I hated that bit actually, which I didn't hate at the time, but this time watching it. And
also, it's taken away from Laurie because
it is. Yeah.
In the comic, it's this big thing because she's trying to save the planet, and then there's the whole thing about thermodynamic miracles, which is seeded earlier on. And what happens with this is just like, let me do this magic trick that I've got, which can help us both look in your past. You can experience time how I do, but I can see it as well. I'm just going to touch your head. And then that happens, and she's like, huh? And like, it's like she's about to say, Eddie Blake was my dad, the comedian's my dad, but he like, he Kanye's her. It's like, I'm going to let you finish, but the comedian's your dad?
I don't
takes that moment away from her.
He does, and I don't like how surprised he sounds.
Yeah.
So I feel like he should be able to smell it on her DNA. Like, I feel like there's that level of, like, I'm not saying explain it like that, but yeah, I hated that moment this time around.
When you say he should be able to smell it on her DNA, like her DNA should smell like cigars and
whiskey.
Oh dear. But yeah, I think what I wanted to say is like the fact that this is a 2.5 hour movie and you've got 12 issues of comic. You think the fact that they've kind of sped things up and kind of the way you're describing things, jumped things along or put in certain MacGuffins that end up as plot devices to make things happen faster than they did in the books. It's because they're trying to cram it all into 2.5 hours at the end of the day, which is like a story as old as time as far as adapting things to film goes. Like when you're adapting a comic series into a movie, or you're adapting a novel into a movie where you've got like 1,000-page novel and you try and turn that into a 2-hour film. You're going to lose stuff.
Like stuff gets lost, but
yeah.
I mean, look at The Godfather. Prime example that it's possible. I've never read the book, admittedly, but maybe book fans are like, "Oh, this film sucks."
Well, this leads from something else, doesn't it? Because what we have with this movie, for all our different and changing enjoyment levels, is a movie that looks a hell lot like Watchmen, but with a different color palette. But does not have. It's like cosplay. Like it doesn't have the spirit of the book at all. Instead, it has cool. It has the same look of coolness that some douchebag nerd in a forum would be when they were recommending New Watchmen instead of just recommending New Watchmen. Like it's all the stuff that's not meant to be cool that is like presented as cool, and then you add in all these slow motion action sequences. And these like well lit recreations, and it's like this is where like a solid understanding of the source material comes in handy, because that tells you what you can leave out of a movie and what you can what you can add that's different to a movie.
Yeah.
And obviously there's evidence of that here with how the endings changed and stuff like that. But then there's no evidence of that here in terms of how some of the other stuff plays out. And I've always said this, there's certain elements where certain lines are read, especially if they're coming from the comedian or if they're coming from Rorschach, and it's that reads, even though I think that Rorschach's misunderstood in this movie, it still sounds like he's saying the line. It doesn't read like, oh, that line was cool on the page, so I'm gonna keep it in the movie. They actually still read that way, and I think that's because the actors are doing a lot of heavy lifting. But then there's certain lines that's you only said that because it's in the comic. But in this situation and how things have subtly changed in the adaptation from comic to movie, you saying this with is this take one? Did you not do a take two? Why have you said it like that? Why have you emphasized these words and not the words that are emphasized in the book? And not to say oh, you can't change the book, but that scene had a meaning in the book. And it's not that you've done it and made it so it has a different meaning, which in some cases that's true. But in a lot of the cases, you've removed the meaning from what's been said, and you're just saying it because it reads badass. And that, I know, it feels so hollow. And there's so many instances of that throughout the movie.
I think Night Owl's a big culprit of that.
Yeah, he is.
And I like him. I think Patrick Wilson is spot on.
Yeah, same.
And he does some good moments. Speaking of something that's new to the film, Night Owl seeing Rorschach get killed, that needs to stay. I think that's one of my favorite.
His reaction is pretty cool with that.
Yeah.
Running back in and going for bite.
Yeah, because obviously in the comic he goes off and sleeps with Laurie again, which, as I said when we did the comic, I don't particularly like that scene, and I think it's unnecessary. So,
do you think that this movie polishes things and puts a sheen on things and glorifies things about the characters that in the original story were never meant to be glorified? Because we're not really supposed to like these people, are we?
Rhetorical question, Greg. The answer is yes.
Yeah.
Because like we were alluding to before, Rorschach being this cool Batman XP, in the same way that I don't know, they're all sort of Batman in a way, but Rorschach particularly being the gruff voiced monologuing Batman type, it shouldn't be that. He was gross, off putting. Found it hard to communicate with his teammates, found it hard to connect to people. That kind of stuff is pretty undersold. He's the guy who eats beans from the tin, and you get one moment of that, and then you get a moment where they pull the cops pull his mask off and they say he stinks. There's only a few of these things where Rorschach in particular is sold as being a creep with surprisingly good morals, who his morals are set up from the wrong inflection point. And I don't know, I feel like they sell his cool way too much, and it shouldn't be that way around.
Yeah, I think that's possibly the biggest crime of the film.
Yeah.
Agreed. I think they make even to an extent, I think they make parts of the film where the comedian is way comes across way cooler than he should be.
Oh, I think they make him, if not possibly worse than in the comic.
They do make him worse, but then there's points where you look at him and it's he doesn't look as
he can't help looking cool, but it's his actions that speak louder than his looks, I guess.
Yeah, but he's not, I don't know, when you look at him, it just has a different look to how he looks in the comics. When you look at him in the comics, he looks like an asshole. That's
the thing, what you're saying is true in that I think that this is a curse of casting Jeffrey Morgan. I think it's a curse of that, because it's not just that he's an attractive guy or whatever and a cool guy, but it's there's stuff where you need a bit more of that, because he's a maximum nihilist, but when he says all his nihilist lines in the movie, and like I said, I think he says his lines better than most. The way they're framed, lit, and shot, even though it's this horrible dude, that it's framed and lit and shot that like, and even how he's presented in the trailer, it's still kind of like cool lines. Like when he says a line, it's still like a cool line, and it doesn't. It lacks the pain and the sort of like I say, nihilism and soullessness that read in the books. Yeah. So what you do, instead of having this pathetic, violent figure who is good at working a room and is like the class clown, the literal comedian, you have this dude who's just like, hey man, he's not that bad. He just tells it straight. He just tells it straight. We all like a straight talker. Like do you want to get a beer of this guy? Yeah, hell yeah. But do you want to actually hang out with him? Probably not. He's going to cause some trouble, but he seems cool. He'll get the job done. Sometimes you just need a guy who'll get the job done. He's willing to get his hands dirty, so we don't have to get our hands dirty. And it's sort of sold that way. Yeah. And I think that is uncomfortable charitably, but I think like it's willfully
getting at. Yeah.
Do you think that's because you don't, when he's like, for example, when he's with the Minutemen, that scene where they're getting the pictures, the one where Adrian's there and he sets the map on fire. Yeah. You don't see like any other characters' reactions to him being a dick. You only see like Adrian's. I don't know whether
you see
Night Owl says something like, "Oh, we should learn not to drink for these meetings." Or something.
Yeah, and you see Laurie in a previous sequence where she's just about to find out who's her dad. She's actually smiling at him, like,
yeah, she's excited by that.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, because afterwards,
you were pretty cool in there. She says it's something like that. Yeah,
because he is at that. That scene, he obviously people don't know what he's been up to. I suppose at that point. But.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess like to the young woman who's impressed by like the guy giving shit to the nerd in the room, then yeah, fair enough, right?
What about the casting? Is there anybody you think is just off? Because I've got one in particular who I think's off.
Laurie.
No, less. I think Adrian. I don't particularly like Adrian.
Oh, really?
He's young. I would have liked like a Mads Mikkelsen.
I agree with
someone a little bit older looking. Yeah.
I agree with you both, Rahul and Askew, because like I think that Marlon Ackerman, I just think that the characterization of her character as well as how she's directed, just a mega awkward.
It's not entirely on the actor. Like some of that is like maybe she was directed, like you said, directed wrong, because some of her lines come out really awkward. Like so many of her lines don't ring true.
Did they involve Night Owl as well? Because he's a culprit.
Yeah, like, I think it's a different problem. So yeah. I'd say that with Ackerman, she's cast for in she does her best in the sequences that Snyder loves the most, and that's the action sequences.
Because she looks the part.
She's exactly. She's good at dropping those poses, and she looks quite cool with that. But I think that in the sequences where there's like some drama to be done, like you're saying, Rahul, there's so many lines that just feel off, and it's like it's not a diss of the actress, because I've seen her in other stuff, and I think she's a good like comedic actress as well, and I think comedy's quite hard. But like, she just feels miscast and misdirected in the movie, and I also
there's moments where that misdirection is more obvious, like it's not on Ackerman, because it's like a line where someone refers to her as not Silk Spectre. What's her hero name?
Jupiter.
Yeah, Jupiter. And she responds with, "I've got a real name. You should use it." And like, I don't think like her delivery seems off, but I swear that's because it doesn't make sense in the script. Like her character doesn't feel like she would have said it in that way, but someone's told the actor to say it that way. And like, that's where I have trouble figuring out whether it's the actor's fault or anybody else's fault. But like, go ahead.
And I was like, this thing, it's already kind of a tough role, because I think Laurie is one of the worst treated in the book as a character. I don't think she's a fully formed character in the book, and she gets way less to do and characterization than the rest of the characters. But like on top of that, it is compounded that she's just given these bonkers line reads that just are truly false. And like you're saying, Askew, like I was for one time a Matthew Good apologist for this movie because I
think
thought
he's a good actor.
I don't know, of course, but I mean, like specifically for this movie,
yeah.
Because everyone at the time on the forums I used to go to would call out him as like the big weak point, and for what this movie's trying to do, I think he's well cast. Because this movie is reframing it, because the book's written in the 80s, so it has no nostalgia for the 80s. But this movie comes out near the end of the noughties, so there's nostalgia for the 80s, and then we can see that in the soundtrack and the look and the change of his costume from like an Egyptian god to like a mocking of like the commercialization of superhero stuff, which is why he's got bat nipples and stuff. but like and those like glow-on masks. But like I think it works for that particular thing he's going for, but then that's all the stuff at the beginning, like the interview with Leibowitz there and stuff, and I guess the conversations with Lee Iacocca and stuff. But like, it doesn't work as well when he's actually in the story properly, and then with the showdown, he just seems super lacking. And like, I think that a later decision that was done with that character in the world, I'm not going to say exactly what it is just feels like a way more on target pick than what they did for him. And like, I think what you said, like a Mickelson, I think that would have been like a very interesting pick. And I agree that, somebody with a bit more gravitas, because he's more like he fits the calculating dude. Yeah, like the guy who's doing the sciencey stuff and the guy who's like manipulating people, but he doesn't fit the guy who like gave away his fortune. Yeah, gave away his fortune to be like Alexander the Great and just walked off into the wilderness to steal people's cultures and make himself a badass. Like, he doesn't have that vibe.
No, I agree.
Didn't they intentionally cast younger people because I think Zack Snyder said something like it's easier to age people up.
Oh, is it?
To,
has he seen this film? That's the worst looking old makeup I've seen.
I'm sure it's something like that. Yeah. Am I right?
I mean, I get the logic, and it's perhaps.
Am I right?
It's 11 years old, different like better technology and better makeup now, I suppose. But some of it with what's her name, Laurie's mother, Nixon's prosthetic.
Nixon is the worst in the movie. His nose.
It is.
That nose is incredible.
But have you ever seen Nixon? Also,
yeah, that Nixon one's terrible.
Impersonation as well.
Yeah. It's a Futurama Nixon.
Here it is, actually. I found it. Yeah. So this is actually, Snyder said he wanted younger actors because of the many flashback scenes, and it was easier to age actors with makeup than cast two actors in the same role.
Yeah, but like as you said, like the Silk Spectre stuff is really bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, because also that actually fits more with the Minutemen stuff than it does with the Crime Busters, who for some reason are called the Watchmen in this, but that's neither here nor there. But like it makes sense with like if you're going to cast in like Jeffrey Morgan and like Carla Gugino, but like Laurie looks exactly the same. They just change her hair. Manhattan doesn't age, obviously.
Vite doesn't age.
Adrian doesn't age, and Night Owl doesn't really as well. They just change how his like face is under the mask.
Yeah, it's this is it. Like, he didn't really do a job of aging them up in any way, even though he said he wanted to. It's like, but yeah, no.
There's someone else actually that I've got issue with.
Yeah,
and this is one that I struggle with because in some ways I think it's really cool, and in some ways I just think it doesn't work. And this is Manhattan.
Really?
Yeah, like so. I'll start with why I think it works. I think having Manhattan be this like soft-spoken guy works in the sense that he's not human and he doesn't really understand us, and he's like trying his best to have a connection with a human but humans are the only thing he doesn't really understand. Like, I think that element of it works for me, but then there's parts of it where I'm like, why is Billy Crudup just speaking so softly for this scene?
I've not seen him in anything else, so I don't know how. Maybe I take.
I mean, the thing is, it's how he acts normally,
right?
But like, I think that doesn't ring true for Manhattan in some bits where, like, I think him like it kind of makes no sense that he's built himself back together as like this Adonis, and then he comes back and he still sounds like this sort of like science nerd. I think that it makes more sense if he did have a bit more of a more gravitas voice, and it works better with some of the dialogue sequences.
See, when I read the books, I always imagine him to be very monotone and very just matter of fact with like a deeper voice. Like, not necessarily gravitas, just like a computer stating facts kind of thing. Like,
I'm headcanon with him as Manhattan. I think his voice...
Yeah.
With him being so soft-spoken, the scene where he's getting interviewed and he kind of like snaps, you see that moment where he kind of breaks and becomes human again. It kind of catches you off guard where he's shouting and stuff. I mean, it's not like a big booming voice, but he's shouting. I'm fine with him, I think. I get what you're saying, but I've always had his voice in my head now. I don't think I can unhear him as Manhattan.
I like that soft, like the soft voice, because it undercuts what you think, you'd get from an omnipotent being.
Yeah,
he should speak telepathically, really.
I mean, to the point you just made, Askew, like that's where it really gets sold, because like he suddenly bursts out with emotion, where he's been quite emotionless and bland the entire way through, and then where it really works is the sequence on Mars, where he's, doing his monologue with that amazing soundtrack in the background.
Yeah, I think that's a good scene as well, obviously.
So, can we move on to the amount of tat that came out with this movie? Because this is something that I was looking at. I was just looking, I just thought like, because I remembered around the time this movie came out that there was like a bunch of merchandising that came with it, and like just a bunch of complete tat. Strangest thing that this collection of tat included was a toaster, and yeah, there was a Watchmen tie-in toaster, and it's there was a Rorschach toaster that made a Rorschach blot on your toast as well. But yeah, like, I mean, why on earth, like, a Watchmen label on the side? Why? Like, what's the deal there with the toaster?
Well, I once went to Alan Moore's house and he's got that toaster.
It's the one thing he liked about the production.
Yep. He loves toast. He's British, and
yeah, puts some Marmite on it in the shape of a Rorschach blot.
Wait, so what other tat was there? Because in my head, I thought you were going to go towards like the motion comics which came out, which were interesting but not actually that good.
There was there was toasters, there was lunch boxes, there was journals, there was messenger bags, there was clocks, watches, magnets, wall scrolls. Rorschach desk
wall
blotter.
Scrolls, I totally get wall scrolls, but the other stuff seems so... The
Watchmen playing cards in a tin.
But that's like, you got to fill Forbidden Planet with something, right? Like that's what that stuff is.
Oh, this is in the there was a Watchmen hip flask. This is like
that makes a lot more sense than not even the toasters for adults, but like a bait box. Who's going to have a Watchmen lunchbox going to school?
I know.
This is clue.
Dr. Manhattan lunchbox of all things as well.
Unless it's like an irony thing, like it's like we're making this comic book film. Let's pretend we're making it for kids. I don't know.
No, I don't think so. I think it's a genuine like DC trying to sell tat to fans type thing.
Yeah, it's par for the course for these Hollywood films, right? Because then the thing that I wanted to ask you guys was, did you watch anything like the motion comics or the Tales of the Black Freighter stuff? Because that, while I wouldn't call it tat, I think the Black Freighter stuff isn't great, and that's part of the ultimate cut that I watched recently, where it's 3.5 hours and it includes that that content.
But like weirdly is that the Black Freighter stuff was made with the intention, like the ultimate cut was always gonna happen. And it was made to do that. So they shot certain sequences so they could lead into it. But like when you even knowing that Snyder was making the movie so that on one cut he could go into those sequences, it always feels so. In the ultimate cut, it doesn't feel natural at all. It just feels like really staple sequences.
Yeah, it's super jarring.
I just want to add, with the tat as well. There was a Night Owl coffee brand. Sorry, I forgot to mention. So there was Night Owl Dark Roast Coffee, which was removed and discontinued. It was taken from shelves after a lawsuit filed against it from OCC, which I assume is another coffee company.
See, I think that's reasonable to release. I think there's something very, very fitting, more so than a bloody lunchbox. But I've never seen the Black Freighter.
You can wake up in the morning, you can have your Night Owl coffee with your Rorschach toast.
And your Rorschach beans.
Yeah, your tin of beans, yeah. And then you can then you can go to work with your lunchbox, your Watchmen lunchbox.
That's a line that sounds bad. The human bean juice line.
Oh yeah,
that's one that, as Leon says, might think it sounds good, but it doesn't.
You see, I didn't watch the because you guys, a couple of you guys watched the supercut, didn't you, with like everything in it?
Yeah, that's what we were just saying. Because like the point I wanted to follow on from Leon was we were saying how even though it was designed to have the Black Freighter stuff intercut into the movie, it still feels really jarring. And like the scene in the alleyway that we were talking about, which the scene in the alleyway already in this cut that I watched at least interrupts a really interesting moment where Manhattan's on on that interview show and he's being Q&A'd about Wally Weaver and Jamie Slater, and that dumb alley fight distracts from that already. And then he says, "Leave me alone," and everyone in the studio disappears. It cuts to the alleyway again. They have some pointless dialogue, and then it cuts to the Black Freighter stuff. So it's like you've been double interrupted before you get that amazing scene on Mars. And like it just doesn't make sense. If it was planned that way from the beginning, they planned it wrong. Like I don't know what. I don't understand it.
That sounds disgusting. Like that pacing is off as is on the, because it's the same thing but without the Black Freighter stuff on the cut that I've seen, and it's hard going.
See, in my head, I remembered the film being "Leave me alone," and then he disappears to Mars, and you see him pop into Mars. Am I just making up my own edit in my head? Is that not how it happened in the theatrical cut you just watched?
No, it ends with that in the same way, but you're right when you say it cuts back and forth to Night Owl and Laurie killing dudes.
And then goes back to Mars, yeah.
That's the worst.
You got that bit where they're on their way to Hollis's house, haven't you? For a beer night with Hollis Mason.
To think I used to justify or like kind of like that scene is madness.
Well, it happened in the comic.
Wait, sorry. So
is it?
The scene in Hollis's house where he's being attacked. You don't.
The bit before that, where Silk Spectre and Night Owl are on their way to Hollis's house, and then they get set upon by Top Knots in the alley.
Yeah, with all the bones sticking out of arms and like knees going backwards and shit. Yeah.
I'm sure that happens in the comic, but it might be a little bit less violent.
Because that's how they do that whole remember being a superhero thing. It's actually quite fun.
Yeah.
But it's also that thing of like the sexual tension between them, and they're going out and fighting, and it's like this energetic thing they're doing, and that I'm pretty sure that's in the comic, but it's certainly not like hyper violent and 5 minutes long like this is.
No,
like they just like snapped people's necks, broke kneecaps, like bones coming out of elbows and shit, and then they're turned on. Like it doesn't ring right.
There's a point where Silk Spectre full on busts a guy's neck. And puts a knife in someone's throat or something. And then, like, later on in the film, Night Owl is telling Rorschach that, like, not to kill someone, I think, at some point.
The dude in the bar where in the comic you overhear somebody talking about Hollis, but obviously you don't get that in this cut, which leads to an awful cut, actually, because I think that was so intended to be there. You see Night Owl in the background facing away from Rorschach, where you would then cut to the scene of him overhearing, and it just doesn't do that. So it's like, it feels so awful little bits like that maybe I'm being too harsh because you would overlook something like that, maybe. And maybe I'm being a little too critical. But
later on, he tells Rorschach he's too hardcore, but he's just been there with Silk Spectre in the alley while she's been literally killing people.
Well, I think the point of the bit in the bar is that he says not in front of the civilians, whereas with the not top by, I'm not arguing for that because I've already like an hour ago said how much
you love that scene. We get it,
but like I think the internal consistency is that with the not tops, no one's there apart from them, but they're still super cavalier with just murdering dudes, which makes no sense.
Yeah. I think you guys overall get a better read of this film than I do because you guys are more movie inclined than I am, I think. Which I think overall you guys get a better read of it and you guys can sort of like dissect it a little bit more thoroughly than I can, whereas all I can do is watch it and compare it to the book and be like, well, that's the same, that's not. I'm not as cinematographically minded as you guys are. But yeah.
Well, from a comic point of view, what do you think about the change of the Antarctic base design? Because I hate it.
I'm not into it. Yeah, I mean, I think there's things that they've changed, and I don't understand why they've changed them. And that's one of them.
And I don't understand. So, like Rorschach in the prison, where it's like the bit where he's there's a riot going on, and they've got the bolt cutters or whatever to open his cell, and there's a bit where the guy sticks his hands through the bars, and in the comic it's your hands, my perspective.
Yeah.
Which is a cool line, and in the film they change it to "Your hands, my pleasure" for some unknown reason. Like this, like you were saying,
because they want it to be gritty and violent. Like Rorschach's getting a boner out of cutting this guy's arms off or something. I don't know. Like,
but then why preserve the lines from the comic in places where it doesn't make sense? As Leon was saying earlier, like there's so many strange decisions in this film.
Yeah,
and to the thing of like inspecting movies differently than you, the thing that I didn't say up front was like I hadn't seen this movie for like 3-4 years properly. And I was fully expecting to have like a different perspective, a different read on how I take in this story, fully expecting to like come out of it with loads of criticisms. And this is me picking up on criticisms for something that I actually really enjoy, because I came out of the film finished watching the movie the other day and had a really good time with it. Like I was surprised at how much I was entertained by this film. And there's a lot of things to love, but then it's so easy because it's that's the dissonance between loving the book and loving the narrative of the book and what the narrative of the book is trying to express, and then being entertained and like just being how joyful this film is in its what it presents. And like I'm trying really hard or I guess I've gotten better at letting go of holding on to the book stuff, because I don't know. The reason I'm so nitpicky about it now is because I wanted it to do better, because there's so much potential here, and I don't know. I still really enjoy this film. I would recommend it to anyone, but it's so lacking in some really core places.
To close out the discussion on the movie, and to move this along so that I can briefly get into the comics, to like skip us forward to 2012, because the comics came off the back of this film, because I think the popularity of this movie launched Watchmen back into the public consciousness and the consciousness of comics fans and things like that, which gave DC the sort of excuse to do these comics 25 years after the original comics. They got other teams of creators to go back and revisit these characters and create some kind of prequel material for them, which is what the 2012 Before Watchmen comics were, which is what we're going to get onto in a moment. But just to close this out, so do you think the differences between the movie and the original graphic novel, do you think these harm the idea of Watchmen or the story in any way? Do you think if you had just seen the film without reading the book, do you think you would have an entirely different point of view from it? As in, do you think it harms the narrative? Well, I don't know about harms the narrative, but do you think it takes the narrative from the book and skews it so much that it makes it something entirely different? And do you think the idea of taking something as important and as self-contained as Watchmen and turning it into something mass-produced is missing the original vision of the creator?
I would say, so like, I'm happy that this thing exists. And like Rahul was saying, on this watch, I had a more pleasant time with it than I did the first time I watched the Ultimate Cut. Because the first time I watched the Ultimate Cut, it really hurt. Whereas this time, it wasn't as bad. And I'm happy it exists because it's brought it to more people, and more people have come to the comic because of it.
Yeah.
But I would say one of the things that really hurts it is that I think Zack Snyder's interpretation of this movie has made it almost a canon for a lot of people. And I think people comic book fans have always been misreading people like Rorschach. But I think the movie amplified that to a degree. But then you have this awkward scenario that we have now where it was fine on 300 because you had a writer who made quite a fascist style story and then directed by someone in quite a fascisty objectivist way. And then you could ignore that because you could, action. And then, so you had that. And then you have now, so it becomes a bit more of a layer cake. But like you had a writer who was doing satire of an objectivist writer's characters, and then is adapted by someone who made his characters, who are a satire of objectivist characters, into objectivist characters again. So it's like he's undone Moore's work in some way, because now it's back to where the Watchmen let the smart and powerful people do what they need to unchecked and solve all of this. And you can argue that no, but like he's the bad guy and But like for all the, I think they like really hand wave all the right wing and like moralistic, sexist and homophobic stuff with Rorschach, especially for when it came out in 2009. I think they sort of hand wave that stuff, and it's just like, it's gritty textures to this character. But I think
you're supposed to applaud the fact that he's calling out the bullshit of like all the whores and politicians.
Yeah,
and blah, blah, blah.
in the same way that people like love Travis Bickle, who he's obviously based on as well. But like Travis Bickle's not meant to be a hero, and when his bit at the end, you can view it through a heroic lens, but really it's not. And you kind of get the same thing with here, because obviously it finishes in the same way of the book, where it's like, I leave it up to you. But then the music goes into, I can't remember the name of the song, but the song is kind of like don't worry guys, the truth is going to come out. And the book more leaves you with a thing of like, is the truth is going to come out, but what's it going to mean? And then this, it's like, don't worry, guys. Rorschach,
hell yeah.
Yeah, Rorschach sorted it. Like,
it's like they're confusing the two because they're taking like a punk song.
Yeah.
Like, it's Desolation Row, isn't it?
Desolation Row.
Yeah, that's it.
But it's the My Chemical Romance cover of Desolation Row. Yeah.
And like they do that, and I think that changes the complete tone of the ending.
It does.
And fits in line with how they've misread Rorschach the whole movie, because now it makes this thing of like, instead of having this disgusting, awful person, he's just this person who sacrificed to clean up the streets. Yeah, and he died. Don't worry, he didn't die in vain, people.
Yeah,
the truth will come out.
He's a martyr for, and he's like, he's been glorified for people when he shouldn't have been, because it's actually, I mean, it's like you said before, it's easy to misread Rorschach in the book anyway, but it's like that movie, it doesn't even make it a misreading. It just feeds you the facet of Rorschach. It just feeds you the Rorschach it wants you to believe in, kind of thing. It's like,
where did that mistake come from, though? Do you reckon it's like in the writing, or do you reckon the like production side was like the audience need a character to kind of like, or to kind of pin as the main character to a point?
I think it's a lost in translation thing, because I think this is the problem with satire that people often say, is that sometimes with satire, like with all things, you want to treat the audience like they're mega smart. But I think one of the problems we've had in the last 3 decades is, or maybe longer, is that satire sometimes is so good that the audience doesn't actually pick up the joke, and instead they take the thing at face value. And then I think that you're going to have a lot of people who are reading Watchmen in the 80s, 90s, and noughties and stuff, and they're reading it through the lens of these badass heroes who are getting their hands dirty to do blah blah, and this big lie cover up that happened. And like conspiracies and cover-ups are often painted that way of like you got to unravel it. And the book is about complicating those things. But then if you read it that way, then one of those readers might someday end up being a big writer-director for Warner Brothers. And this is the case we have, because like some of the big strengths of Watchmen are the fact that Snyder is the nerd who made it. But then a lot of the big like negatives of the movie is because Snyder is the nerd who made it. Exactly,
yeah. And it's not, you don't get like, there's no, the way this film ends as well, like you have no idea what sort of publication the New Frontiersman is.
Well, it's hinted at, but like I said, it's like hand waving. So we see the thing where it's like blah blah something right, and then someone sprayed wing.
Yeah. And it's not. Yeah. Sorry.
And then you see that same poster in the window of the New Frontiersman.
Yeah. It's but I mean, like it's like it's not there on your first viewing when you're already bedazzled and awestruck by the special effects and the fight scenes and everything else sitting in the cinema, like it would be when you read the book, you know?
But there's going to be a lot of people who see the film who don't read the book, never read the book, never will read the book, and then they get that as their message from the film.
Exactly, yes, which is the point, no.
But that happens.
It happens. And then they go and watch the TV series, and then they feel ashamed of themselves.
Hey, careful. I've not finished it.
Yeah, well, we're going to come on to that. That's going to be part 3 of this Watchmen series. But what we're going to do now is we're going to move on from the movie, and we're going to get into the 2012 prequel comics, which kind of came off the back of this movie, because this movie coming out and hitting the cinemas, and then people kind of like getting back into Watchmen as a story, and people going out and buying the comic and things like that. DC thought it'd be a good time to go back and revisit these characters and to pay, the way they put it is like pay homage, pay respect or whatever to the original text, and to do these tributes in the form of like 4 or 6 issue miniseries dedicated to each main character in the Watchmen story, to try and give us a little bit more color about the characters, and to try and give us a little bit more maybe an idea of what these characters are about and everything else. And largely it's, as we're going to come on to, it's things we don't need, right, Askew?
Oh, 100%. Like,
yeah, because the whole point of Watchmen is, like I keep saying, it's a one and done. It's 12 issues. It's self-contained. It's start, middle, end. And that's all you're supposed to need. And that's all you really do need. The whole point of us doing this series, really, of this stuff is like, yes, there are other bits of Watchmen media to enjoy out there, and maybe some of it's really good. But the point is, like, the enduring thing that's birthed all of this is this single graphic novel from the 80s that is actually really the only thing you need to enjoy, or to enjoy these characters. Now, before Watchmen, so each of us kind of like went through this in varying degrees. I read the whole lot, like the whole thing, which amounts to something like, well, let's see. There are
like 35 or something like that.
Yeah, I'm about to tell you the full number because I'm about to.
Too many.
It's 35 individual issues.
Yeah, so.
Sorry, Rahul, what was that again?
It was 37.
37. Total of 37 issues, yeah. So you've got Before Watchmen Minutemen, which is 6 issues long. Before Watchmen Silk Spectre, which is 4 issues. The Comedian one's 6 issues. Night Owl's 4 issues. Ozymandias is 6 issues. Rorschach is 4 issues. Doc Manhattan is 4 issues. Moloch is 2 issues. They did a 2-issue Moloch series. And is it Moloch or Moloch? Because in the movie they say Moloch. I've always thought of it as Moloch. What do you guys think?
I say Moloch because it rhymes with bollock. Yeah.
That's not my reason for it.
I don't say Moloch.
You Askew, it sounded like you said bollock. But...
The reason I say Moloch and not Moloch is because Moloch sounds like Moloch the Gluckin from Abe's Odyssey. And Moloch also, like, when you look at his full stage name from when he was a magician, Moloch the Magnificent doesn't sound as good as Moloch the Magnificent, does it? So I assume
like a
going
Moloch.
on like the tradition of stage names and, you know, Moloch the Mystic and all that kind of stuff, like these like old school magicians, stage magicians and shit. I think it's Moloch, but that's me. And there was a dollar bill one shot, and there was also an unpublished Watchmen Before Watchmen epilogue, which never made it to print, and I'm not sure why, but it didn't. It was cancelled, but it doesn't say why.
I wonder how, like, kind of like the time frame when they were being released, because chances are they were seeing how well these were doing and being like, maybe we'll just save our last couple of pennies on this last one.
Well, I mean, these got collected into an omnibus. You showed me the omnibus actually on Amazon.
I did. I nearly bought that version.
Bet you're glad you didn't.
I wish I'd bought a physical copy so I could have put it in the bin. Serious? It's unfortunate that it's now sat on a server with my digital signature available to wear at any time, anywhere.
Yeah, you can't talk the server across the room.
No.
Yeah. I can't snap my tablet into because I'll instantly regret that. That's the problem I've got right now. But no, yeah, I read all of it, and some of it's okay, some of it's really bad, and you know, some of it just falls completely flat and just completely misses the point. So the amount of talent that DC threw at this is absolutely ridiculous. You've got names like J. Michael Straczynski, Brian Azzarello, Darwin Cook, Len Wein, Lieber Mayo, Adam Hughes, Andy Kubert, Joe Kubert, Amanda Connor. And it's just like, they just basically just like threw an all-star team of creators at it. And we're just like, you know.
Do you reckon they chose to be on this project, or it was like DC were like, right, we need to gather some people in an office. Whoever's here, you're all doing one of these, whether you like it or not, because I feel like these people shouldn't have stepped up to the mark. I'm sorry. I guess it's a payout at the end of the day, but like if you were asked to do this, you'd be like, I don't think we should. I mean, I'm just basing that on what I've read, so...
I guess a job's a job, though. And if you had the opportunity to work on an IP that you love, then some people would jump at that chance and hope that they could do it justice. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the initial reaction on the announcement of these comics wasn't a good one. Like, people were like, "Why are you doing this? Like, what is the point?" And obviously, Alan Moore wasn't pleased. But what's new? I feel like I'm just going to be saying that at least once an episode while we do these Watchmen episodes. Alan Moore wasn't pleased. But yeah, poor Alan. So this is just another one of the things for him to just turn around and go, why? And I think there was like somebody spoke to him on the phone. I think it was the New York Times actually spoke to him, and I've got like a quote here in this New York Times article I'm looking at now. "I tend to take this latest development as a kind of eager confirmation that they are still apparently dependent on the ideas that I had 25 years ago."
Savage.
Yeah. So yeah, they threw all this talent at it and created this these kind of like prequels and things. Another Moore quote was, "As far as I know," he said, "there weren't that many prequels or sequels to Moby Dick." So there we go. And I feel like in doing this, because I mean, this is nothing new in comics. Okay. So it's not like this is something that's new. It's not like this is something that, you know, comics fans shouldn't be used to by this point, but it's something that's unique in the fact that they're doing it with Watchmen, in a thing that doesn't really leave much space for this to be done, and probably, you know, something that doesn't require or need it because it's not an ongoing narrative. So it's, I mean, like for things like Spider-Man to be passed down from creator to creator, and for people to have a chance to make their own mark on a character like Spider-Man, that's different, because it's not like Spider-Man was a fully formed thing and was only meant to run for so many issues. It had no end. It was, the whole point of Spider-Man was it was an ongoing thing. And it's not like Watchmen was designed as an ongoing narrative. It had a definite end, so it leaves less space for things like that. And I think that's the difference. And I think the way that Watchmen is made, and the statement that Watchmen was supposed to make when it was originally released as a single graphic novel of 12 issues, 12 comics, 12 chapters, and the waves that it made, and being at the forefront and the birth of the graphic novel, I think that this creating these prequel and sequel comics for it, or these prequel comics and this, all of this kind of like side material for it, I think that kind of cheapens it slightly. And
the source material, or
well, cheapens the whole impact of Watchmen and the idea of Watchmen by burying it under more. So instead of it being this standalone unit, it becomes one thing in a sea of things. And it just becomes lost, and it becomes like every other comic out there. I mean, I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, because like I said, for things like Batman, Superman, whatever, these well-established comic characters that have run for years, the strength of them is they run for years and people get to make their own mark on these characters. But I don't think Watchmen works that way, and I don't think it was ever designed to work that way. And I think that is my main problem with these sequel and prequel comics, in the fact that they should not exist because they do not need to exist.
Yeah,
but you enjoyed it though.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy it?
I enjoyed some of it, because technically I can't fault some of the comics. Like, some of the comics were really well made, and the amount of talent behind this, like, it's hard not to enjoy some of it. And to actually look at these pages and be like, that's a cool page. But the point is, overall, I don't think I needed it or necessarily craved it, or, it's not something that I can be totally on board with just for the idea, just because of what it is, Well,
I'm on the polar opposite, in that I think this is very easy to look at and say this is hot trash. I want to give a line here that Rorschach says in the Rorschach comic. Someone, I don't know, says like a criminal he captures. Rorschach says verbatim, "Bitch to be you."
Right? That's the one that I picked up on.
That. You would never
say that. No, and I'm not saying that's one of the good ones.
No, I know. There's multiple examples of certain lines that are said, and the way it's delivered just aren't in the vocabulary of those characters. It's ridiculous.
That's amazing. I hope there's like catchphrases. Don't have a cow, man.
It is crazy. Like, if you think that the film misreads these characters, some of these comics are bad.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah. But I mean, like, when these books came out, there was massive controversy that came with it, because some shops refused to carry them.
Oh, that's
and
brilliant.
Certain creators refused to take work from DC in a sort of show of solidarity with Alan Moore, I guess, because they were like, well, if this is how DC treats people, because, this is like kind of displaying the ridiculousness of some of the contracts that some writers and things are made to sign, and this is the final straw because they're doing this with Watchmen, and this is how it's going to be, I'm not going to take work from DC anymore, or whatever.
This is the thing, because normally with that type of attitude, you'd roll your eyes a little bit, because it's like, no word is sacred, and anything can be adapted if the rights holder has the rights.
That's the point. The whole point of comics, this is what I was getting at. Like, comics are there to be adapted and to be built upon and whatever. But I think Watchmen stands alone in that it wasn't supposed to be that.
Well, no, I don't think it stands alone. I think there's a lot of graphic novels that were written to just be one thing, work in one medium, and never ever be adapted ever. And if the people hold the rights, then that they have the power to do that. But I think the reason why I don't roll my eyes at comics people saying, hell no, we're not going to stop this, is that in this particular case, it's not just that, it's the Holy Watchmen, but it's the case that there's quite a storied history with how Moore was screwed with this.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think this is like the straw that broke the camel's back, basically, and people going, no more DC. And it's a point of historical record that Moore and Gibbons were screwed, and we know how badly they were screwed. And it's not just them. This is something that's happened to a lot of comics creators. Like the original creators of Superman were massively, massively screwed. And like, we've only got to look at what happened to Jack Kirby, as a prime example of the way the comics industry takes people and chews them up and spits them out. But there you go.
Which was your favourite of these Before Watchmen?
Yeah, so if I go through it now, basically, I particularly really enjoyed the Minutemen stuff. So the Before Watchmen Minutemen series, those 6 issues were really good. I really liked it because it had this almost Bruce Timm-esque cartooning and this reverence for the Golden Age comics, while also continuing in the tradition of Watchmen with the social commentary and an exploration of the times through the superhero and master adventure lens. And I think what I like most about it is that it actually explored something that Watchmen hadn't already explored or given us. So it wasn't exploring the main characters in Watchmen. It was giving us something about the Minutemen, which had only been briefly mentioned in the Watchmen. You didn't get a lot of, stories about the Minutemen.
I think you get more than what you think, because all those bits and those articles that are cut between like the chapters of the graphic novel, I think you get quite a fair chunk.
Well, it's not
always a bad thing to feel hungry for a little bit more.
Yeah.
You don't always need that full stomach, and this is what these Before Watchmen are trying to do. You
don't, but I really liked this 6-issue miniseries, this Minutemen one. I think this is the best one, and I think this is probably, out of all of them, if I had to like burn the rest and keep one, this would be the one that I'd keep.
That's unfortunate because it's the one that I read and I didn't really like it very much.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
And like, to add to what you said, I thought the art was kind of cool because it had that the Bruce Timm style, which is nice to see on page, but I don't think it really suited the story. And like, there was a real lack of action clarity. There's stuff like where people are leaping out of moving cars to save people and stuff. And it just doesn't, I don't know, some of the action just didn't ring true to me. And like, I also feel like it didn't really add much because, like Askew was saying, you do get a lot of the Minutemen stuff in the novel, and also the fact that it informs what's happening in the narrative you are seeing in the comic. And like you were saying, you don't always have to be full of that stuff. You can be hungry for more and see how it informs the story. I guess I wasn't necessarily in the mood for this. Also, there's a 4-panel scene of Eddie Blake menacingly chomping a pickled egg, which I didn't need.
I think I need to see that.
First issue.
Yeah, it's. I liked the fact that it was like the golden age. It was like in the kind of like had reverence for the Golden Age comics, and it was continuing the tradition of Watchmen with this like, everything. Like it was an exploration of the times through the master adventurer lens, and it basically gave more color to those Hollis Mason excerpts that we got in the original book. And I can't fault the Minutemen miniseries because I actually quite liked that. And this is the bit that, it had like early pulp hero leanings and everything else. And it's something that I like what it would have been like for superheroes to have existed back then. I always like these kind of stories where they put superheroes into kind of like historical context kind of thing. Like, when you get the Marvels, for example, where you have, the first superheroes appearing in the 40s and 50s, and they're actually in the 40s and 50s. And things like that. Like, I really enjoy that kind of stuff because I like how they do it and how they put it in historical context and everything else. And I think that's what I enjoyed. Like, that's what I got out of this. And I also actually quite like the Dr. Manhattan stuff as well. The Dr. Manhattan miniseries. I liked how they explored that character. And they gave him this context as a quantum observer affecting the world around him and choosing not to make choices in order to preserve the world and the universe and the timeline. And it's like a winding comic that explores other universes where events may have happened differently. And it's got like this whole Schrodinger's cat narrative that runs all the way through it. And it's like got beautiful artwork, like this whole thing where, with like John ends up being the quantum observer in the Schrodinger's cat thing and ends up affecting the world around him in that way. Because of having his intrinsic field stripped from him and everything else. And like, we get this kind of like alternate timeline. Like, what if he actually managed to retrieve his coat and get out and didn't become Dr. Manhattan? And it turns out that, you know, bad things still would have happened or whatever. It's a cool idea.
See, that sounds way more interesting than the comedian one, which is, he's in Vietnam. Yeah. We already know he did that.
Yeah, the comedian Vietnam one was just like nasty for sake of nasty.
Yeah, it's very slow going as well.
Yeah.
Mind you, some of the cover art is pretty good.
Yeah.
In both Rorschach and the comedian ones, but
I think, the Rorschach and the comedian ones, while there was some great art, they amounted to little or nothing for me. Like, they were just pedestrian comics. They added nothing. They misinterpreted the character of Rorschach massively, as you've already mentioned.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But the actual overall narrative of the Rorschach one's not too bad. There's essentially a killer on the loose.
Yeah.
And Rorschach, it's when he's Walter Kovacs. He's interested in this girl, or he's friendly with this girl. And long story short, spoilers, he's going to take her out to dinner. She shows up to where they're going to meet, but he's running late because he's dealing with crime stuff. And essentially, because he ran late, the killer gets her. And it's like a bit, not a bittersweet, but it's like a whoa moment at the end. And I was like, oh, that's not bad. That's not bad. But that's
not bad, but it's not Rorschach.
Exactly. It's
yeah.
Is that the one that you had that panel of Travis Bickle?
Yeah.
Oh God!
They're in the taxi, and it's some of the worst. Like, Rorschach wouldn't get in a taxi for a start. But in what universe does he get into a taxi?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you got the same reading of it I did, but that taxi driver's the killer.
No, the killer's somebody who goes to our restaurant.
Oh, see, I figured
the killer's a regular at her restaurant who you see in some of the backgrounds, or at least I presume that's because he's not the killer. But he has some really weird preachy line of about like people being bad. It's awful.
It is.
Really, I'd recommend people just read it just so you can just see how bad that is.
It's not good. Bad. And the comedian one's not good either, because it's just basically like a load of nothing. It's like the comedian was in Vietnam. And Vietnam made him
with the Kennedys and stuff that they build upon, like Kennedys, which got me reading about the Kennedys, and I learned some stuff that crazy stuff that might be common knowledge to other people, but I was like, wow.
The comedian killed Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah, there's all that. It's just
who didn't he kill?
Yeah,
true.
It's just like the comedian was a nasty man who went to Vietnam and came back nastier. The end. That's my. It's just
almost a poem.
Yeah. That's it. That's what that comedian one was, and it wasn't my favorite, as you can probably hear from the way I'm talking about. I don't like the comedian. I don't want to like the comedian. You know, he's like, this was my problem with the Snyder movie. Like when he does that grin and he's chomping on that cigar, and because the actor they've hired to play the comedian unfortunately looks incredibly cool. Like, I don't want to like the comedian. Stop making me like the comedian. He's a horrible, horrible man. You know, he deserves to be punished for his crimes or whatever. But yeah. The Silk Spectre one, the Silk Spectre miniseries. Did anybody else have a look at this?
Nah.
Yeah, this was almost completely lacking an off tone. It didn't sit well with me, and as far as I'm concerned, this is the worst of the bunch.
Whoa.
It's almost as if it can't decide what it wants to be. Like, we get some really beautiful art out of it. Like, there's some beautiful psychedelic sequences detailing the effects of a new formula of acid. And there's a couple of cool alternative covers for it. There's a nice Bruce Timm cover, and there's a really nice all red cover. It's just a shame about what's been behind that cover, because this Silk Spectre story is just like, it's like a coming of age tale where she runs away from home, like in rebellion against her mother, while she's still in high school. And she joins some hippie commune somewhere. And she's, you know, all about the kind of like beatnik, like hippie lifestyle or whatever. Like, she's working in a cafe, and she's she's doing the whole kind of like hippie protest things and all that kind of stuff. And then she gets involved. It's like all about like all very of the times in the like the kind of like the 60s, flower power and all that. And she's getting like she gets involved in something to do with a bad batch of drugs or something, or someone hassling someone she knows, and she ends up because she's already the Silk Spectre by then because her mum's been training her. So she basically goes, this is like the first few times she goes out in costume and starts cracking heads basically to help people she likes. And then there's this bad batch of acid that's supposed to be making these hippie kids that are rebelling against society into good little consumers. Like the acid activates part of your brain that makes you want to buy stuff and be a docile consumer instead of standing up and fighting for social justice and everything else. I don't know. It's really bad.
Yeah,
you could be leading me down the garden path with this now.
Yeah. I was just saying, this isn't directed at you, Greg, but what the fuck are you talking about?
It's like Silk Spectre comic. Yeah, it is. It's batshit.
It sounds like, like a silly comic book story.
That's the point. That's exactly the point I'm getting at, and that's why I don't like it. Because it's why? This is, why?
I've heard that this Silk Spectre one ends spectacularly badly as well.
Yeah.
Like there is a really how it ties back into the original comic. Like it ends in a place that happens in the original comic,
and then
and reframes it, and
Oh god, and it's like all through her eyes, like how it ends in the original comic. It's like she's like looking at all the different characters that are in the room at that first Crime Busters meeting or whatever, and she's like, "Oh, look at this guy, he's big and blue, and look at this guy, he dresses like an owl." And like maybe this would really annoy my mum if I took home the big blue guy or something to that effect that she actually says.
This is what I was looking up because I was looking up other people's opinions because I didn't get to read this. But the very final panel of that comic is a big full page spread of her looking at Dr. Manhattan saying, "Oh, he's so big and beautiful and blue. I wonder what it would be like to take him home. I bet that would really piss my mum off." And then the comic ends. And like the whole reason she's there is just to like annoy her mum and make some shitty comments about like side-eyeing this guy to bring home and annoy her parents. Like it's awful. There's
some like some of the acid sequences are really good when she's tripping. Like that's some good comic art, right? Like some of the really inventive things they do with that. But other than that, there's absolutely nothing of merit here. I'm sure. Like there's a bit where the comedian does the thing of the dad scaring the boyfriend off as well. Like
that can't have been in the comedian one. That's
in this. He made this in this one, in the Silk Spectre one.
Oh no,
like,
right, okay. I thought you meant
he turns up on the West Coast and like to try and get Laurie to come home because Hollis won't, and Sally is like then goes to, because Hollis won't do it, Sally rings the comedian and gets the comedian to go and do it. And he does it in his way where he basically threatens to kill the guy if he doesn't enlist and go to Nam and write a letter to Laurie saying he doesn't love her anymore or something. And it's like, it's awful. It's just plain awful. So yeah, don't read that one. Just go look at the pretty Bruce Timm cover and the really nice all red cover, which is absolutely beautiful because it's Mike Allred. It's just a shame, a crying shame that it's for that comic. I'm sorry.
I don't think it's a shame. I think these people deserve this negativity. Sorry to be that guy, but strip the Watchmen aspects of it, I don't think there's anything remotely interesting in the storytelling that would warrant these as like a short story in any shape or form.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame that Mike Allred made a cover for this comic. It really is. And the Ozymandias portion, which was, while it was beautiful with some really interesting page layouts with uses of like circular panels and things like that, it was a fun ride. It was written as if it was narrated by Veidt himself. And it gives sort of like a blow by blow of him, like his parents dying, him quitting his fortune and going and traveling around the world. Basically the Adrian Veidt origin story. And then it basically goes into how he orchestrated the whole plan behind Watchmen, but through his eyes. So we're seeing things from his angle instead.
Which we already know his angle because we've read
exactly.
the book.
Yes, it's retreading ground that did not need to be trod. Even though it's a pretty book, it's ultimately like it doesn't give you anything. There's nothing there. I mean, like the artwork's absolutely stunning. It's just a shame that it got made because it's just like the story itself isn't. I don't think it adds much to anything or give you any kind illuminate. It doesn't illuminate anything. It doesn't add to anything. It's just don't get anything out of it. And then like the other thing that the only other bit that I really enjoyed, because the two bits that I really enjoyed were the Darwin Cook Minutemen stuff, and then this bit, which is the Crimson Corsair, which was a tribute to or a riff on the Tales of the Black Freighter stuff, which was the in-universe comic books in the Watchmen universe, because they read pirate comics instead of superhero comics, because superheroes are real. Who wants to fantasize about them anymore? I actually thought this bit was pretty great. It was originally published as 2 pages at a time at the back of each issue of the miniseries, but you can actually buy it all collected. And it is like wonderful art, and it's a great homage to sort of like classic black and white horror comics. It's like in this classic black and white horror style. It's like moody horror comics. But this doesn't actually do full black and white. There is like pops of subdued color throughout. And it's this pirate horror story, about the Crimson Corsair that's got absolutely nothing to do with any Watchmen characters whatsoever. Like, literally just a tie-in based on the whole pirate comic craze in the Watchmen comics. And it's actually really good. So, well, it's all right. So, yeah, there you go. I actually really enjoyed this one. For something that was a backup story and was published 2 pages at a time at the back of each of these other comics, it's actually not bad. So there's something positive there. I mean, I didn't even mention the Night Owl stuff. It was bland, but I like the Batman comparisons and the riffs and subversions. So there you go. And again, like, it's just such a, like, I weep for some of the talent that was like involved in these books and what came out of it. The fact that it was nothing of any like value or merit or whatever. It was just a money making exercise for DC at the end of the day. And like, you know, cause like this is like the Kuberts worked on. I think Joe Kubert worked on this, right? On this Night Owl one. In fact, I'll run through all the credits at the end, but I mean, damn. The Dollar Bill one was a one shot and that was kind of fun. Much the same reasons I enjoyed Minutemen Golden Age, done in like a real Golden Age Superman comic style. So that was really cool. The Moloch one was like that Rousseau art where it's all kind of like grimy and edgy and whatever. And it was an interesting, sad story about Moloch. So Moloch, however you want to say his name. So that wasn't bad. I mean, it all served as good entertainment, but aside from the Minutemen stuff, I was left with very little to chew on. The original text is the gourmet meal, and these were like fast food approximation of said meal. So although paying tribute to it and trying to stir feelings and emotions to match what you might have felt when you read the original, like trying to match the flavor, but ultimately falling short. And as a tribute to the work of Moore and Gibbons, they're all right, but we know very well that they were just a device built for the perpetuation of Watchmen and to make money. And there we go. It's not something we needed. So that's my take on those books. And, I mean, has anyone got anything else to add at all?
Not for the comics, really. Like, I wasn't that interested in these to begin with. Like, I read the Minutemen one because I felt like it was the only one that was going to add context that I cared about, and then it ultimately didn't really. I will say, like, I've skimmed through all the covers of these, and there's some really good covers. I think the artwork for the Dr. Manhattan run is the best. I think it has this cool, like, blue vibrancy and stuff that I really like.
That's Adam Hughes. So
right, okay. And then I think there's one cover that I really liked for Rorschach. I think it's issue number 3, where it's like it's a shoe bursting through like blocks of wood, but the like the tread on the shoe looks like Rorschach's mask, and the wood breaking at the toes looks like Rorschach's hat, which is kind of I just like that inventive use of like these different elements to make it look like Rorschach. So that was cool.
So what I'll do is I'll just blast through the credits now for these, and then we can wrap up. So, for the Before Watchmen comedian series, you've got Brian Azzarello as the writer, with Len Wein helping, J.G. Jones and John Higgins on art, Alex Sinclair and John B. Higgins on colours. This is the John Higgins from the original Watchmen books, by the way. Letterer was Clem Robbins, and you've got covers by like Eduardo Riso and Jim Lee. For Doc Manhattan, it was J. Michael Straczynski doing the writing, John Higgins helping out with that, Adam Hughes and John Higgins for artist. Colorist is Laura Martin. Letterer was Steve Wands and Sal Cipriano. Minutemen, Before Watchmen, was Darwin Cook, writer, with Len Wein helping. Darwin Cook and John B. Higgins, art. Colorist Phil Noto. Letterer Jared K. Fetcher and Sal Cipriano. I think the John B. Higgins and the Len Wein and the Sal Cipriano being in every comic, I think that's to do with the fact that the Crimson Corsair was published as a backup for each issue, because the Crimson Corsair was Len Wein and John Higgins art. Len Wein writing that. You had the Ozymandias one, which was Len Wein, Jay Lee artist, with June Chung and letterer John Workman, June Chung colorist. Night Owl was J. Michael Straczynski, Joe Kubert and Andy Kubert artists. Colorist Brad Anderson, letterer Nick J. Napolitano. Apologies there for you almost mispronouncing your name. You've got the Silk Spectre one, which is Darwin Cook and Amanda Connor, with Amanda Connor on art duties, Paul Mounts colorist, and Charlie Manuel on letters. And the Moloch stuff was Michael Straczynski with Eduardo Riso, Clem Robbins lettering, Patricia Trish Mulvihill colorist, and Dollar Bill, which was Len Wein writing, Steve Rude artist, colorist Glenn Whitmore, and letterer Steve Rude. So, you know, like, the amount of talent they chucked at that and what came out of it in the end, you know. There we go. That was the Before Watchmen series. And that is something that on a scale of 1 to 10 definitely shouldn't exist. and should probably be somewhere down towards the one end of the scale, I feel. So yeah, I mean, that wraps up our second portion of Watchmen discussion. That has been Watching the Watchmen Part 2. If you like what you hear, we have a Ko-fi, and you can head over and buy us a coffee, or donate the money that you would pay, like the price of a coffee, and that will help keep the lights on for the podcast and keep everything going. You can find everything Ace Comicals at www.acecomicals.com. We'll be coming back and doing a third part for this Watchmen series, which will be based on the recent HBO TV series. And again, that will be featuring Anthony Askew as our guest. Askew, where can we find you?
If you want to hear me cough on another podcast, dynamiteinthebrain.com. Always about anime. Do a few manga ones. We've done a few live action adaptation stuff. We've talked about the adaptations. If you go to Twitch, you can watch me play stuff at Ant Askew, and Twitter is also Ant Askew. That's it.
Yep. Everything we do is at www.acecomicals.com. You can find links to our Facebook, our Twitter, where we are under Ace Comicals. You can find us on Instagram under Ace Comicals. You can find us to listen to us in a plethora of places, like iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Castbox, Castro, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn. We're everywhere. Almost starting to sound like the poker app, that, isn't it? So, I mean, you can find me on Twitter under @Bato. You can get involved in the conversation. You can write to us at acecomicals.gmail.com. You can DM us on Twitter or whatever if you want to get in touch. Ray, where can we find you?
You can find me getting really excited about talking about the HBO Watchmen show, and also on Twitter at Monkeh, MOONKEH.
And Leon, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Leon Everett.
And something else that's really different and really cool that we do now, Ace Comicals now has t-shirts. So yes, you can find us at acecomicals.threadless.com, which is our little t-shirt shop. And there's currently 2 designs available. And I think Askew's got one now, haven't you? Yours arrived the other day.
Mm-hmm. Looks good.
What do you
Looks
think
really
of it?
good.
Is it good?
Good quality. I like my color combination that I've chose. So I think you've got some good colors, and I think the design works well with a myriad of them. So yeah, I'm happy with this.
What did you go for? Ash grey or something?
It's like an ashy grey. Not quite grey, but not quite white. Somewhere in between.
I can't remember what the proper names for the colours are now, but I went with a white one for my test print, and it looks pretty good. And I was actually quite impressed with the print quality. It's really good print quality.
Yeah, it looks good.
It has survived the washing machine so far. So
nice. Ask you, are you going to model it so we can put it on our Twitter page?
Not right this second. But
right now.
I would recommend washing whenever you get a new t-shirt. Wash it first because it's a bit crisp, like a bit too rough on the old skin, sensitive skin. Me.
I mean, the print quality is. I'm impressed with the print quality. Print quality is sick on the test print that I've got, and it's survived. It's been in the washing machine. It still looks cool. So it's the kind of print.
The washing machine and the design's gone. When I take it out, I'll be very disappointed.
It's the kind of print where you get these like really cheaply made print t-shirts, but this is the kind of print where it's actually like in the shirt. So it's not like rubber on top of the shirt. It's actually like printed into the fabric. So it's not likely to fade that fast. It's Are
you making promises here if it starts fading?
No, I know my graphic shirts, Askew. I've got plenty of them. Yeah, I know that this is the kind that kind of sticks around better and doesn't begin to peel away. I can totally vouch for
it. It's thick material as well. It doesn't feel cheap and chatty.
Yeah. So there we go. That has been Ace Comicals episode 87. That is Ace Comicals Watching the Watchmen Part 2. Ace Comicals over and out.